Welcome to Case Vault, where every case has a crack, a contradiction, a missed clue, a detail that should not be there. Today we're looking at the killer who wrote his own confession into a published novel, and the detective who read it twice. Wroclaw, southwest Poland. Monday afternoon, November 13th, 2000. A 35-year-old advertising agency owner named Dariusz Janiszewski walks out of his office around 4 in the afternoon. He never makes it home. He doesn't call. He doesn't show up anywhere. His mobile phone stops responding that same evening. His wife reports him missing within 24 hours. The first investigation opens. The Wroclaw police work it for 6 months. They produce almost nothing. Then December 2000. A month after he disappeared, fishermen on the Oder River pull a body from the cold. The body is Janiszewski's. He didn't get there on his own. He'd been beaten. He'd been starved. His hands were tied behind his back. The Wroclaw police filed exactly how he'd been bound under the kind of detail they don't put in a press release. Dariusz Janiszewski was 35. He owned a small advertising firm in central Wroclaw, the kind of one-room agency you walked into to print a sign or a brochure. He ran it himself. He had a wife. He had a steady business. He had a routine. He left the office around the same time most afternoons. That Monday in November, he locked the office door at 4. The lights in the building came back on Tuesday morning. Janiszewski didn't. His wife filed the missing person report the next morning. The Wroclaw police took it seriously from the start. He wasn't the kind of man who walked away from his life. December 2000. Fishermen working a stretch of the Oder River near Wroclaw pulled something out of the water they first took for a bag. It wasn't a bag, it was a man. He'd been in the water somewhere between days and weeks. The cold preserved what was left. The autopsy began that same afternoon, and it produced a list of injuries that didn't add up to a quick death. His wrists were bound behind his back. A length of rope ran from those wrists up to a noose around his neck. He couldn't move his legs without tightening the rope on his own throat. The pattern has a name, the backward cradle, a method designed so the victim does the work. He'd been beaten in the days before his death. Investigators concluded he'd been kept without food or water for around 3 days. There were knife wounds on the body. Medical examiners disputed the exact cause. Strangulation was treated as most likely, and drowning was not ruled out. The binding pattern went into the file as the kind of evidence police don't release publicly. The autopsy described it once. The press conference didn't mention it. The papers never printed it. The detail belonged to 2 groups, the investigators and whoever had tied the rope. The reason was procedural. If a copycat ever appeared, the rope would tell them apart. If the killer ever described the rope without being asked, the killer would tell on themselves. That's the point of a withheld detail. You keep it back for the day somebody offers it to you. The first investigation worked the usual leads: family, co-workers, competitors, clients, the wife. The police pulled phone records, financial records, address books. None of it broke open. The phone had gone dark the day he vanished and stayed dark. No fingerprints at the office, no witnesses to the abduction, no surveillance footage from any street he might have walked. The kidnapping happened in a clean blind spot. Wroclaw is a city of more than 500,000 people. Janiszewski had stepped into it on a Monday afternoon and stepped right back out of the world. By the time the body came back, the trail was already weeks old. By May 2001, 6 months in, the file was shelved. The case wasn't closed, it was just paused. That's what cold cases are, a drawer of boxes nobody has anything new to add to. 3 years pass. The case sits in a Wroclaw drawer through 2001, 2002, 2003. No new leads, no new evidence, just a box on a shelf and a wife waiting for a phone call nobody is going to make. Then the file lands on a desk that hasn't seen it before. The desk belongs to a Wroclaw detective named Jacek Wroblewski. He's the kind of investigator who reads old files. Old files are the only ones nobody else has finished reading. Wroblewski doesn't have new evidence or new witnesses. What he has is the same paper everyone else already read, and the time to read it again, line by line. The autopsy report. the interviews, the phone records. He treats a closed file like an open question. 3 years of nothing doesn't mean nothing happened. It means somebody missed the thing that did, and the thing that did is still in the file. One detail catches him: the phone. Janiszewski's mobile had gone dark the day he disappeared and never came back online. That part everybody noticed. What nobody had finished was the trace on the device itself. A dark phone isn't a lost phone. A dark phone is in somebody's hand. If you want to know how a detective with no new evidence cracks a case nobody else could, hit subscribe. What Wroblewski finds next is the kind of work this channel is built for. Wroblewski knew that every mobile phone carries a serial number from the manufacturer. The phone number ties to the SIM card. The serial number ties to the device. You can change SIM cards. You can't change the serial without changing the phone. Wroblewski contacted Janiszewski's wife. He asked her if she'd kept the original purchase receipt for the phone. She had 3 years on. She still had the paperwork in a drawer. The serial number was printed right on it. Wroblewski now had 2 things: a serial number and an internet. He ran the serial through Allegro, Poland's largest online auction site. He wasn't looking for a seller, he was looking for the device itself. The device came back. A phone with that exact serial number had been sold on Allegro within days of Janiszewski's disappearance. The phone was on auction before the body was out of the water. The buyer had paid. The buyer had received the phone. The buyer was a businessman with no link to the case, a stranger who'd bought a used phone on the internet, the way people bought used phones on Allegro every day. The seller's account name on Allegro was a short alias, Chris B7. The account had been registered under a Polish home address. The address was real. The address belonged to a man named Christian Bala. Christian Bala was around 30 years old. He had a philosophy degree from the university in Wroclaw. He worked odd jobs. He'd published a self-funded novel. He was a writer. And, according to Wroclaw police records, his estranged wife had been seen on a date with Dariusz Janiszewski, shortly before Janiszewski disappeared. Wroblewski now had a name. He had a motive. He had a stolen phone sold by the suspect within days of the killing. What he didn't have was a piece of physical evidence linking Bala to Janiszewski's body. Not a print, not a fiber, not a witness. On paper, Bala looked like the wrong kind of suspect for this case. A philosophy graduate, a self-published author, a man with no criminal record. Quiet life, quiet apartment. Not the man you'd put at the center of a hog-tied body in a river. Selling a stolen phone is not the same as killing a man. Polish prosecutors don't take a phone trace alone to a murder charge, especially not 3 years after the killing, when the suspect can claim he found it, bought it, was given it. Wroblewski could pick Bala up for the phone, but the phone would walk Bala right back out the same week. The case needed something else, something that put Bala inside the act itself. So for most of 2004, the case sat at the same place again, a suspect with no body evidence, a phone on a screen, a motive too thin to charge alone, and nothing to push the file across to the prosecutors. Then, in 2005, a tip came into the Wroclaw police. Not about the phone, not about the wife, about a book. A reader had picked up a Polish novel published 2 years earlier, in 2003. The novel was titled Amok. The author was Christian Bala, the same Bala already in the police file as the man who sold the dead man's phone. There was a chapter in it the reader couldn't get out of their head, a chapter about a murder, told from inside the killer's head. The reader thought the chapter sounded like the Janiszewski case. They picked up the phone and called the police. The tip moved through the police until it reached the man who'd already pulled the original file. Wroblewski went out and bought a copy of Amok. He took it back to his desk. He opened the book. Amok is a first-person confession told from inside the head of a young Polish intellectual. The narrator's name is Chris. The book is graphic. It's deliberately ugly. And in one chapter it describes, in detail, killing a young woman. The narrator suspects his victim of betrayal. He lures her somewhere private. He overpowers her. And then, in the passage Wroblewski is now reading at his desk, He describes what he does next with a length of rope. He tied her hands behind her back. He ran the rope from her wrists up to a noose around her neck. That binding pattern had been in the autopsy file. It hadn't been in any newspaper. It hadn't been at any press conference. It had been withheld for exactly this purpose. The novel had it, page for page. And then the novel kept going. The narrator stabbed his victim with a knife, and after the killing was done, after the body was disposed of, Chris sold the knife on an internet auction site. Christian Bala had sold Dariusz Janiszewski's phone on an internet auction site within days of the murder, under the username ChrisB7. The novel was describing what Bala had actually done. 3 matches. The binding in the novel matched the binding in the river. The auction sale in the novel matched the auction sale of the phone, and the narrator's first name matched the seller's first name. Chris. 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 September 2005, 5 years after Janiszewski stepped out of his advertising office and disappeared. Wroclaw police arrested Christian Bala in the town of Chojnow, about an hour and a half west of Wroclaw. They searched his apartment with the kind of warrant that lets you open every drawer. They weren't looking for proof of a phone sale anymore. They were looking for the rest of the file. Inside the apartment, police recovered items connected to Janiszewski's advertising business. A pen branded with the firm's name. Documents. Small personal effects that belonged to a dead man Bala had no reason to know. Bala had kept them, 5 years after the killing. A drawer of souvenirs from a man he had never officially met in a city more than an hour from his apartment. By 2007, Christian Bala was on trial in Wroclaw. He'd been in detention for roughly 2 years. He sat through the proceedings taking notes, the way a writer takes notes. The prosecution laid out the structure piece by piece. The estranged wife, the motive, jealousy over Janiszewski's date with her, the phone's serial number, the Allegro account, the ChrisB7 username, the recovered items in the Chojnow apartment, and the novel. By the time the case reached court, the novel had done its investigative work. The prosecution still had to prove the case through evidence: the phone, the motive, the recovered items, and the violence in the file. Bala denied everything. He told the court, and these are his words, that it was ridiculous he should be in jail, that somebody had drawn the wrong conclusion from an innocent work of fiction. He framed himself as the artist on trial, a man punished for what he'd imagined. The court didn't buy it. On September 5, 2007, the Wroclaw court ruled that Christian Bala had planned and directed the killing of Dariusz Janiszewski. They convicted him on the body of evidence gathered after the phone trace reopened the case. They used the exact words, planned and directed, not committed alone. There wasn't enough physical evidence to prove Bala had carried out the murder by himself. The court found he hadn't. Somebody had helped him, that somebody has never been identified. They sentenced him to 25 years in prison. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Drop a like, and let's close the case. An appeals court ordered a retrial on procedural grounds. In 2008, the lower court reviewed the same file again: the phone, the binding pattern, the motive, the items from Chojnow. The retrial verdict was the same. Christian Bala had planned and directed the murder of Dariusz Janiszewski. The 25-year sentence stood. He's still serving it. The Janiszewski case wasn't broken by a forensic breakthrough. It wasn't broken by a witness. It wasn't broken by a confession in an interrogation room. It was broken by a confession on a bookshelf. Bala had written the binding pattern into the middle of a muck 2 years before the tip reached Wroblewski. The novel had been on Polish bookshelves the entire time. Anybody could buy it. Most people who did finished it and put it back down. Anybody could read that chapter. Chris ties his victim's hands behind her back. He runs the rope from her wrists to her neck, and anybody did read it. They just didn't recognize it. The binding had been kept out of the news exactly so they couldn't. It took a tip from a single reader to put the binding back in front of somebody who'd seen it before. One reader closing a 5-year-old murder by recognizing a chapter they couldn't get out of their head. And a detective who, when the tip came in, had already read the file. twice. The narrator was named Chris. So was the man behind the murder. Same alias on the auction site. Same rope pattern in the chapter. Same case, 2 documents apart. A receipt in a drawer. A phone on an auction site. A noose in a novel. That's the case. If you see things other people miss, hit subscribe. Case Vault drops a new one twice a week, and the next crack is sharper than this one.